So the state constitution of Coahuila banned the further importation of slaves past 6 months, and it basically said that all slaves who are slaves currently are going to be slaves for life, but their children will be freed at 14. All this didn't limit slavery for current generation because, again, their slaves are going to stay slaves for life. What it meant for next generation and the prospect of further immigration from the United States was that it's going to discourage further American immigrants from coming to Texas, because most American Southerners and most people coming into Texas believe that cotton is the way to get rich, and you can only get rich off cotton if you use African slaves. So this Coahuila Texas state constitution is going to dramatically upset Stephen F. Austin. So he at this point had already fulfilled his first contract and was working on fulfilling his second contract. And what he sees is that if he's not going to get further immigration from the United States, because if Coahuila, Texas outlaws slavery, he's not going to make any more money. Again, the way he makes money is by working as a liaison between the government and the people coming in. And people are going to stop coming in if you can no longer bring slaves in. So Austin, disturbed by this, will start trying to come up with a get around to this ban on slavery in the Coahuila, Texas state constitution. What he's going to do is come up with a plan, and he's going to put this plan down in something called Decree 56. So Decree 56 on paper seems innocuous. It seems like it's something that, is a perfectly reasonable, something that you could see many governments passing. So what Decree 56 is basically going to say is that it's going to be a law, and he's going to ask the Coahuila, Texas state legislature to pass this law. But the law basically says that the Coahuila, Texas state government will recognize contracts that are signed in the United States. So if somebody is in the United States, basically promises to give somebody $5, if those two people come to Mexico, come to Coahuila, Texas, then that contract's still valid. The person still owes the guys $5 just because it's signed in the United States. So a contract, Decree 56 says a contract signed in the United States is also going to be valid in Coahuila, Texas. You can obviously see a similar law being passed in the United States, or something with Canada and the United States, a contract signed in Canada being valid in the United States. So Stephen F. Austin is going to want this contract passed, and he is going to have Erasmo Seguin give this Decree 56 law to the Coahuila, Texas state government. So Seguin, again, working with Austin, his sort of Tejano ally in the Coahuila, Texas legislature, will go to the Coahuila, Texas legislature, introduce this law saying, again, contract signed in the U.S. is valid in Coahuila, Texas. Well, this is going to be easily passed. Nobody in the Coahuila, Texas legislature sees this as being an issue. They pass it into law. Well, immediately after it's passed into law, Stephen F. Austin's plan for Decree 56 is going to be become apparent, because what he's going to do immediately after his passage is he's going to start sending out word to U.S. newspaper, to prospective colonists, those who want to continue to move to Texas. He's going to say, you can continue to bring slaves. So Coahuila, Texas may have said you can no longer bring slaves, but I've come up with a way that you can continue to bring slaves. What he's going to tell those who want to bring slaves to do is, before you leave the United States, give this document to your slaves. And basically he writes up a sample contract. The contract says that slaves are agreeing to 99-year labor contracts. So I will work for you for 99 years. Obviously this is a lifetime contract. And it says the children of the slave, the slave will agree that their children are going to work for their room and board for the first 20 or so years of their life, and during this time the owner will provide them with food, clothing, things like that. After 20 years, then the children have to start working off the debt that they accumulated for their first 20 years. So basically, a slave says, I'm going to work for this guy for 99 years. My child will work for him for 20 years. After that point, he has to continue to work to pay off the food and labor that he were providing for him for his first 20 years. So this food and labor, or food and clothing, as you can probably imagine, is going to be very difficult to pay off. So you're starting to work 21, 22. All this time you're accumulating additional food costs, additional clothing costs. And so what it is basically saying this person isn't a slave. They're just under contract to this person for 99 years. Their children is not a slave. They're just working off a debt they owe to the owner, which is a debt that will never be repaid. And basically, at that point, you can get the person in debt to sign up their own children for this debt peonage. So it's replacing slavery with debt peonage, but it's essentially slavery, okay? It's slavery in the name of indentured servitude. Well, Austin is going to start sending the examples of these contracts out to people in the United States, and again, different versions of this contract will say slaves will receive a wage of $20 a year, but their clothing and food costs will be $60 a year. So again, if you're only making $20 a year, but you're in debt for $60 a year, you're only going to pay off a third of your debt, and you're going to continually get in debt, and you're even going to get in more debt. So Austin's basically been saying, forget about the Coahuila, Texas Constitution. Slavery's still legal. It's just you've got to sign these contracts within the United States. So, and here's an actual quote from New Orleans newspaper. It says, "The law of Mexico prohibiting slavery is evaded by having Negroes bound to serve an apprenticeship of 99 years. There are several planters who number 50 or 60 such apprentices." So 1828 law, Decree 56 is passed, and slavery is essentially going to continue in Texas. Well, the Coahuila, Texas government starts getting word of what's happening, and so does the Mexican central government, okay? Well, Mexican central government, Mexico City, hears about this evading of the Coahuila, Texas Constitution. They've learned about the Fredonian Rebellion, and they've learned that some Americans are showing up and not following the proper rules that they agreed to. Not learning Spanish, some people coming in illegally, some people not listening, attending Catholic services, things like that. And so the Mexican federal government in Mexico City will decide to send a guy named Manuel Miri Terán. Oh, by the way, here would be so you meet the slaves and bring them in New Orleans, and then you have them sign these contracts, and then you bring them overland into Texas. So again, Mexico City government is concerned about what's happening. So they're going to send this guy named Manuel Miri Terán to go to Texas and see, should we be worried about what's happening up here in Texas? Is this something to be concerned about? Are these Americans evading the law all the time? Is this Decree 56, did they have it passed explicitly to evade this slavery prohibition on Coahuila, Texas's part? Are they following the rules that we set out? We continue to hear rumors. Well, Miri Terán is going to arrive in Texas in March 1828, and he's going to start touring the various plantations. So by this point, again, there are a lot more cities than this. In this area, East Texas, all around this region, there are a lot of productive cotton plantations, things like that. Miri Terán is going to go from one area to another, and one of the things he's going to remark is, yeah, these guys are bringing an industry. He's going to remark that, again, this is producing a lot of cotton. There's, we have steamboats coming up and down in this. The population has increased significantly. At this point, Texas is, getting close to 20,000 people, the vast majority being people coming from the United States. And he says these guys are absolutely being productive. They are doing financially what we wanted. Very impressed by the farms and plantations he saw set up by the Americans. He is going to be highly disturbed, though, by the fact that the vast majority of people, especially here in East Texas, are Americans. Something like 10 to 1. There are only a handful of people of Mexican ancestry out here. And he's also going to be disturbed by the fact that by 1828, a lot of these new arrivals are coming in illegally. They hadn't come in under a contract by any of the impresarios. They just come in, either grab some land or squatting on it, or came in and they're working on, illegally on somebody else's land. They hadn't gotten approval of the Coahuila, Texas legislature or the government in Mexico City. They're not even pretending to be Catholic. They're not attempting to learn Spanish. They're not following Mexican laws. And in fact, some of these guys are even having racist views of Mexicans. So we've talked about Stephen F. Austin working with Tejanos, things like that. But some of these guys, that idea is sort of abhorrent to them. And they're going to start discriminating against people of Mexican ancestry. And Miri Turan witnesses this. And again, he also actually witnesses, the people being brought in under these terms of these contracts and this violation of the Coahuila, Texas state constitution. So Miri Turan says, I'm impressed by how Texas has grown, but if things continue to go this way, then we might lose this area. These people are not becoming Mexican. They're essentially staying American, and they're keeping their connections to the United States. And as a matter of fact, in some ways, they're becoming anti-Mexican. So Miri Turan, he's basically going to determine that we need to stop American immigration if you want to keep Texas. Okay, you got to make some changes, or else these guys are going to break away from Mexico. We need to make some changes. So Miri Turan is going to be set off back to Mexico City in order to make these recommendations. But before he can get back and bring the stuff for the Mexican Congress, a number of things are going to happen. So something that had been happening, we've talked about this already, is this constant fight between Centralists and Federalists in Mexico City. Again, Mexico started out under Iturbide, Centralists, most of the authority in Mexico. Then we got the 1824 Constitution, where most of the authority is placed in states. And what we're going to see 1828, 1829 is a series of overthrows where the Centralists, Federalists continue to fight each other. At one point, Vicente Guerrero will take over briefly as the president of Mexico. He's going to be overthrown. We're going to see another group take over Mexico. So we're going to have a lot of instability. So he can't bring his recommendations to stop American immigration because you don't know who the government is because it keeps getting overthrown. Not only that, 1829, Spain is going to invade Mexico. Again, the Spanish never recognized Mexican independence. 1829, they try to invade Mexico to retake it, thinking that people of Mexico see this instability, want the structure of Spain, they're going to come back to us. But the invasion fails, and the Spanish are going to get kicked out. But again, that occupies the people of Mexico's attention. So this is going to be another thing that happens 1828 to 1829. So this is going to be the situation until about 1830, when Miri Turan finally gets in front of a somewhat stable Mexican Congress and says, this is what's happening in Texas. And he goes over and explains the situation again, as far as economy, as far as the Americans coming in, and says we need some reform. So on April 6, 1830, Mexican government, so this would be the federal government of Mexico, the government of Mexico City, is going to pass something that historians have referred to as the Law of April 6, 1830. So what the Law of April 6, 1830 is going to do is a number of things, okay? One, it says no more contracts or no more immigration of Americans into Texas, okay? It says all contracts that are currently unfulfilled will stay unfulfilled, okay? So if you are somebody who has agreed to, Coahuila, Texas has said you can bring in 300 families. You've only brought in 110. That's it. You're not going to get any more. So all American immigration is stopped, and no more future contracts. So if you only got 110, you're only getting 110. No more families coming in. Now later on, Stephen F. Austin and a guy named Green DeWitt will get permission to fill their contracts, but that's sort of a side story. Everybody else, no more people coming in, okay? So no further American immigration. As far as slavery, basically the Mexican government is going to say in this law of April 6, 1830, stop with Decree 56. There's no more slavery in, no more slaves are coming in. It says slaves already in Texas will stay slaves, but stop bringing them in under contracts, bringing them in as slaves. No more additional slaves in Texas. Again, this is part violating the law. It's also part of this Enlightenment thinking, this prevailing in Mexico at the time. So no more importation of slaves. The law of April 6, 1830 will also say, while we're stopping immigration from the United States, we are going to promote colonization from other areas. So send people over to places like Ireland, other places in Europe, get them over here instead of these Americans. We need somebody to counter this growing American influence. Mexico, find people in Mexico that are willing to move up there. So Americans can't come in, other groups can come in. One other thing the law of April 6, 1830 will say is, Miri Tehran, you're the one who knows the situation best. We're going to send you with some soldiers to Texas to make sure this law is held up. All right, so we want you to uphold this law. So you need to go there and you need to make sure no more Americans come in, no more slaves come in. What they're going to do to finance this is basically say, all right, another thing with the law of April 1806 is, we're going to set up a series of forts in Texas, and we're going to set up these series of forts. Oh, here's Irish colonies that are going to be drawn out shortly after this. We're going to set up a series of forts, one of these Anahuac, one at Velasco, and we're going to set them up at some of the most important rivers, and we're going to start collecting duties on incoming and outgoing goods. So whenever cotton's being grown in Austin's colony, shipped down here, down these rivers, goes out to the ocean, before it gets out there, you got to stop by this newly created Mexican fort. We got Velasco down here, Anahuac down here. There's going to be another one, fort place down here. Before these goods go down, you have to stop, and Mexican officers will collect a duty or a portion of your goods. And this money is going to be used to fund the additional soldiers that are manning these forts, as well as additional soldiers coming in here to watch the border. Up until this point, in order to grow Texas, the newly arrived Americans for a period of time were exempt from duties and taxes. No longer. Okay, so really quickly, it says that no more immigration of Americans into Texas. All currently unfulfilled contracts are going to stay unfulfilled. Again, Austin will later get a permission to fill his, but everybody else, no more. The slaves, no more. Decree 56. Slaves can stay slaves, but no more are coming in. Promote colonization from Europe and Mexico, particularly Ireland. And Miri Tehran, you come up here, make sure these provisions are being filled. We're going to send some soldiers with you. These soldiers will construct these new forts on these rivers, and they're going to start collecting duties on incoming, outgoing goods. And the money collected from these will be used to pay these soldiers and to enforce Mexico's edicts. So they passed this law of April 6, 1830. Now, obviously, this is going to upset the Americans. You know, they don't want to pay these extra duties. It's going to cut into their profits. They don't like the idea that, you know, their cousin can't come in anymore. You know, they thought he was going to be coming in on the contract the next year. You know, people are going to be saying, you know, I had this labor contract for somebody to come in here, slave essentially. Now I can't get this filled. And so this is going to lead to a lot of resentment here. And this resentment is going to come to a boil in 1832 when there's going to be fighting at one of these newly created forts, this Anahuac fort. So again, this fort is going to be stationed with Mexican soldiers under a guy named Juan Bradburn. So this is this Fort Anahuac. Juan Bradburn is actually pretty interesting. He's from Kentucky. He had moved to Mexico. He joined the Mexican army. He's American, but he's going to be serving the Mexican military, and he's going to be very supportive of Mexico. So he's American, but he's adopted his new country. He's become loyal to him. And as we're going to see, he basically views a lot of these recently arrived American immigrants as being disloyal to Mexico. And as we're going to see, he's going to be very vengeful against these newly arrived Americans. Well, what happens in Anahuac in 1832 is some slaves from Louisiana. This isn't their masters bring them or anything. It's just a number of slaves from Louisiana will cross the border of Louisiana into Texas. They'd heard that Mexico was getting rid of slavery. They're hoping that they can escape over here, get their freedom, and they escape over here, and they're going to flee into Anahuac, where Juan Bradburn, they're going to come in here, they're going to take shelter with Juan Bradburn, and Juan Bradburn will let them in. Basically, the way he sees things is, they came into Texas. Once you come into Texas, again, if you're a slave in Texas before this time, you're staying a slave. But since these guys came into Texas after the slave immigration was legal, essentially these guys are free. So he's going to take them into this Anahuac fort, and he's going to eventually start to release them. They escape from Louisiana, so they're free. Well, this disturbs local slaveholders. This disturbs a lot of these Americans who have recently arrived in Texas. And some of the Louisiana slaveholders will commission some Americans that have recently come to Texas, including this guy named William Barrett Travis, to get the slaves and return them to Louisiana. So William Travis is a local attorney, another attorney named Patrick Jack. They're going to show up in Anahuac, and they will say to Juan Bradburn, return those slaves, initially they just basically say, we want them back. Well, Bradburn's going to say, no, they're free. They're under my protection. You guys need to leave. Travis will say, if you don't give them back, there's a crowd coming down here. They're going to take them by force. They're going to kill you and your soldiers, basically, and they're going to take them back to Louisiana by force. Well, when Bradburn hears this, he takes this as a threat. He's going to arrest Travis and Jack. He's going to throw them in a brick kiln, which will serve as a jail in Anahuac, and basically imprison them there. Well, a group of locals hearing about the situation, again, Bradburn keeping these slaves, arresting Travis, and a mob of about 200 people is going to surround Bradburn's fort at Anahuac, and it looks like there's about to be a fight between the local settlers supporting Travis and wanting the slaves to be brought back to Louisiana around Anahuac. Bradburn's refusing to adhere to the mob, and it's looking like he's prepared to fight them. Well, the commander of a garrison of Mexican soldiers up here in Nacogdoches hears about the situation. He's going to come down here and tell Bradburn this isn't worth fighting for. He's going to relieve him of duty, and he's going to return the slaves. He basically says this isn't worth fighting for. Again, there's not going to be violence. It's not going to be break out into a battle or anything like that, but you do have an almost confrontation here at Anahuac. Well, right at the same time, and actually as a result of Anahuac, there is going to be bloodshed down here at this fort at Velasco. Again, Velasco, just like Anahuac, meant to collect duties. This is where soldiers, these Mexican soldiers, are stationed. Well, a group of these American Texans up here, they learned about what's happening at Anahuac, and they'd planned to come down by boat to support Anahuac. So they're going to be sailing down here to go to Anahuac, and as they're sailing down this river, they're bringing firearms, things like that, to support, to help free William Barrett Travis. This is when they're still locked up. They're going to have to pass by Velasco. Well, the soldiers at Velasco will call on the Americans, hey, you need to stop. Where are you guys going? Well, they learned that they're going to Anahuac to help free William Barrett Travis. And obviously the commander of Velasco is going to say, no, I'm not letting you proceed. You have to stop here. You can't go any further. Well, it's at this point a firefight will erupt between the Americans. They'll start firing on the Mexican soldiers here at Velasco. The Mexican soldiers will start firing back. And during this fight, 10 Texans and 5 Mexicans are going to be killed. Fort will eventually be taken over by the local Texans. Again, these are just guys that are coming here to support the mob at Anahuac. They'll take over the soldiers' fort, and we have, again, a number of people die. So these disturbances at Anahuac and Velasco have led to direct confrontation between the Mexican government and these soldiers. It's actually so disturbing what happens here. Miri Tehran, he's in charge of this situation. He gets depressed, and basically he thinks, this is it. I don't know if I can control things past this point, because now we're having open fighting between Mexican soldiers and these Americans. He commits suicide immediately after learning about what happens. He gets a sword, stabs it in his stomach, and basically says, whatever happens from here, we're losing Texas. At this point, by the way, the population of Americans in Texas upwards over of 20,000, probably closer to 25,000, edging on 30,000 or so in 1832. So right now we've had fighting between the Mexican government and the Americans. How are the general population, how's Stephen F. Austin going to react to this? Well, there will be a meeting among the various settlers among here. There will actually be two meetings. The first is going to happen July 1832, so right after Anahuac and Velasco, where the colonists are going to discuss how to deal with the situation. Well, the meeting is going to be presided over by a lot of these first colonizers. So at this point, 1832, we've had some colonists in here for 10 years. A lot of the people first arrived under Stephen F. Austin before he actually even officially got his contract in 1822, some shortly thereafter, 1833, 1834. By this point, you've been in this country for 10 years, and this group, a lot of these guys, these are the ones that have acculturated, a lot have learned Spanish, and a lot of these guys have a lot of investment here in Texas. They're running well-funded plantations, they're making a lot of money off this, and they look at this as possibly being destabilizing, like this could mess up the situation. You're actually going to have a couple of newcomers here at this convention of 1832 who are going to say, we should fight. This is this is the Mexican government going too far. They're now charging us duties. They're now locking up William Barrett Travis. They're doing too much. We should fight. Well, the people that have been there for a long time, they think this is destabilizing. It's just going to cause a lot of trouble. They're not exactly happy with the Mexican government, but they don't want they don't believe that any revolts or anything. Like, they basically say to these new arrivals, these guys who haven't acculturated themselves, you don't know what you're talking about. We've got money invested here, you don't. So the older, the people that have been here for a while, are going to win out. But how do we explain the violence here? If the Mexican city government, government in Mexico City, learns that our people attacked Mexican soldiers and basically took over this fort, then they're going to be upset and send an army there. What do we do about this? Well, fortunately for these American Texans, what's going to happen at the same time this happens is another overthrow of the Mexican government. And this one is yet again going to be done by this army officer, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. So in 1832, actually right before this, there had been an overthrow of the government where you saw an installation of a more centralist government. So it basically went centralist, federalist, more centralist. Well, 1832, the Federalists are going to look at the situation and say, we think too much power is in Mexico City. We want a more federalist government in place. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna is going to take over control of a portion of the army, and he's going to lead this federalist insurgency to take over this temporary centralist government and basically overthrow the government in favor of a more centralist government yet again. So again, this is going to be one of these things going on in the background constantly, these overthrow of these government. Well, this happens at the same time again as the convention, so a lot of the convention members are going to say, why don't we portray the Anahuac and Velasco violence as being in support of the Federalists? So the Federalists just won this, and the government, it was controlling Anahuac and Velasco. That was the more centralist one. So why don't we just say we were fighting in favor of the Federalists? They won out. We were fighting in support of Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna and his effort to take over the Federalist government. So they're going to basically say this is a fight for federalism. Our colonists fought at Velasco and Anahuac and threatened at Anahuac, not because of slave issues or anything else, but because they really like Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna and they want to support federalism. So they're going to send word to Mexico City congratulating Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna and the Federalists on taking charge and saying, yes, we supported you. We had our own fight up here against the centralist government. So that's what they're going to do in 1832. But they realize this isn't going to completely solve the problem. So they're going to meet again in 1833, and what they're going to do is say, all right, so we got these federalists in charge here. They're very much in favor of more power being in the states. We have a growing population here. As a matter of fact, we're getting close to 30,000 here in Texas. We think it's about time that we can support our own state. So they locked Texas in 1824 to Coahuila because the Texas population was small, 5,000 or so. Now we're getting close to 30,000. We're getting close to the population of Coahuila, so we should become our own state. And again, if we're federalist, then we can't, more federalist government, then we can start passing our own laws. We can basically, what they're thinking is, if the federalists are in charge, they're gonna we can basically override immigration laws, and we can override slavery laws. We don't have to listen to Coahuila, Texas anymore because we're breaking away from them. And with the federalists in charge, they'll let us make the rules with immigration and slavery. But the thing we need to do is become our own state first. So a second convention is going to meet a little bit about a year later after the first convention, after the convention of 1832, this convention of 1833. We'll sit down inside. What can we do? Well, we're going to, the colonists are going to meet once again. Again, there'll be some of the young, recently arrived guys talking about, maybe breaking away revolution. But the older guys are going to say, no, this is ridiculous. We just need separate statehood. And what they're going to do is they're going to start drawing up plans for separate statehood, breaking away from Coahuila, Texas, just having Texas. They're going to write this letter to the Mexican city government. They'll also ask for a repeal of the law of April 6 of 1830, and they're going to draw up their own new state constitution for Texas, and it's going to be based on the Tennessee state constitution of 1796. So, second convention, we want to have separate statehood. We want repeal of the law of April 6, 1830, and we want, and they're going to write up their own state constitution. Well, after this, 1833, who should we deliver this request for statehood and this new constitution? Well, they're going to decide probably the best person to do this would be Stephen F. Austin. So in 1833, Stephen F. Austin will travel down to Mexico City. He's going to meet with the highest officials there. He even meets with Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, who at this point had taken over as president of Mexico. After the Federalists assumed charge, Santa Anna took over. And Stephen F. Austin is going to say, all right, we supported the Federalist overthrow. That's what Anahuac and Velasco are about. We just want to become our own separate state, appeal the law of April 6, 1830, and we would like to make our own separate rules. We're going to stay loyal to the Mexican government. We just think we should make our own decisions ourselves. Well, he meets with Santa Anna. He meets with some other higher officials, and a lot of these people are going to say, no, I don't know if I trust you guys. A lot of these guys had heard Miri Turan's report, and a lot of these guys had heard about Austin trying to get around these provisions on slavery, and a lot of people are going to say, yeah, I think it's better that you stay with Coahuila, Texas, and we don't want more Americans to come in. Austin will go around Mexico and Mexico City, and he's going to be trying to talk to one person or another, but they're going to keep rejecting his petition out to half court. Well, out of frustration, in 1833, Austin is going to decide, all right, I can't get any support for this, but at this point, the government of Mexico is still in fluctuation. It's a whole little side deal where Santa Anna steps down, puts his vice president in charge. So Stephen F. Austin doesn't know, how to go about things. Nobody's listening to him. So what he says in 1833 is, it's chaos down here. You guys just go ahead and write up the state, or approve the state constitution. Go ahead and start setting up the state government and act like a separate state. I'm going to try to get things clear down here, but just go ahead and just start passing laws yourself. It's not like these guys can monitor us because there's so much chaos down here. So basically, he says, don't listen to what I've heard down here. Basically, I've heard people say, dismiss us, forget that, just go ahead and set up the state government anyway. Well, Austin sends this letter back somewhere between Mexico City and Texas. Mexican officials will read this, and basically the way they're going to read this is, this is treason. This guy heard us say no, heard us say that you can't have separate statehood, but said go ahead and do it anyway. So Stephen F. Austin will then be arrested. He's going to be put in a home arrest in Mexico City, and at this point he'll be locked up for about a year in Mexico City, won't be able to leave. Well, all right, so we got this other problem here. Now we have Stephen F. Austin elected. Well, things are going to become even more chaotic in 1834. So Stephen F. Austin's down there. People of Texas, do we set up our own state government? What's happening with Austin? What do we do now? Well, in 1834, things become even more chaotic when there's this, again, further trouble in the Mexican City government. So Santa Anna, for a brief time, he had left the presidency, and he had put his vice president in charge of things. So he'd basically taken over as president, put his vice president in charge of the newly federalist government, and he had gone home to Veracruz, where he's doing things there. He's just almost in like a semi-retirement, letting his vice president run things. So vice president's running over this federalist government where all the states control most of the power. Well, his vice president's having a lot of difficulty, and he sees a lot of the state governments getting away with things he doesn't like. So Santa Anna, again, he's the one that installed as vice president, is going to make the decision, I know I just supported this federalist government, but I think we need a stronger central government. And so in early 1835, Santa Anna is going to basically go in and overthrow his own government. So he just helped the Federalists get back in power in 1832. He determines in 1835, nope, this federalism isn't working. We need a more centralist government, and we need the power back in Mexico City, and I want the power around me. So you can think about it this way. 1832, he became president, took over, but the president in 1832 was a federalist president, didn't have much power because the power is in the states. Well, he says, 1835, I want to be president again, and I want more power around me. So in 1835, he will march as his own vice president. He's going to seize control of the Mexican Congress, basically dismiss the Mexican Congress, replace them with military officials, and once again, we're going to have an overthrow of the centralist government. And basically, at this point, he just tears up the Constitution of 1824 and says Mexico's essentially going under this dictatorship. I mean, it doesn't say it in those terms, but no longer will the states have the power. Central government in Mexico City will have the power. Well, in reaction to this, we're going to see a number of states in Mexico, including Yucatan, the Zacatecas area, and a couple areas up here, basically declare themselves in revolt. So you have these local leaders, didn't like giving much power to Mexico City. Now they're going to have to give over a lot of power to Mexico City, and a lot of these places are going to openly revolt against Santa Anna. Now, as you can see in this map, this place up here, Texas, will too, although it's not going to revolt against Santa Anna immediately. We'll talk about why this area is going to reach this decision to revolt next.